How stupid is golf?
You're clearing some drains. Golf is a fucking great sport. What?
What's clearing
Your
drains?
your swing looks like the most uncoordinated thing I've ever seen in my life. Welcome back to Seek a Strength.
How is it uncoordinated?
Welcome back to another 10-minute talk. Today we're answering one of your questions or a request that somebody had in the comments of a previous video. And this is coming from user stroke VF5NU4EV8K. Thanks for your comment and your normal username. So, it comes down to, I would like to see something on how much varying leverages have on sports-specific movements in comparison to other factors, and if not as important, what difference they make.
It's putting the sound on this, just so you know, because you just need to, you need to know where time it is.
Okay.
You need to nip it there.
Okay.
You know.
Is it on?
It's on.
The first thing for leverages for me is, right, leverages make a difference. They make a difference in some sports more than others. Certain leverages are a hell of a lot more important than others are. So if you take a sport like weightlifting, the ratio of your femur length to your torso length, or your femur length to your tibia length, is unbelievably important. Then you have ratios between your humerus and your radius. That's kind of important for the jerk, but it's not as important as the initial ones we talked about there. So there is certain sports really bias you towards those leverages are great, those leverages are terrible. Other sports, it doesn't really matter as much. And it's important to note as well that within those sports, it's not just being longer or being taller or being lankier is better or worse, but it's the specific leverages for those specific movements is what makes a big difference.
So the interesting is certain sports have major variance with the kind of leverages involved, or the type of people or the morphology of the athletes involved in that sport, and then other ones have a serious amount of homogeny across the sport. So if we take one sport that was incredibly homogeneous, if we look at, for example, the NBA, if we look at the basketball players, the average height is something like 6'7", 6'8", was that what you said?
Yeah.
So incredibly homogeneous in relation to their leverages. Everyone's really tall. I'm not going playing in the NBA. I'm well over a foot short of being ever going to play in the NBA. No matter how athletic I am, no matter how good my vertical is,
No matter how much hustle you got.
no matter how much hustle I have, no matter how good my hand-eye coordination is, I am precluded from the NBA by the nature of those leverages. And in reality, that's what's going to happen. So there might be some, you could make the argument that if you really wanted it, if you're really skillful, yeah, you could go play in the NBA. But in reality, the differences and the nature of basketball, due to the leverages and due to the homogeny of everyone, just precludes people who are very, very short compared to those athletes playing in the NBA. Because while it's a very skillful sport, there's actually not a whole lot of different options available to the players when they're playing. The ball has to go in the net. There is only a certain number of ways. You have a certain set of rules that you have to adhere to. Now, if you compare that to something like jiu-jitsu, so we can have a variety of different sizes within our weight class, of course, and the amount of options available for what kind of game you want to play are drastic, and there's a huge difference in that. And so we can get to the same path with a variety of different options, which is a submission, but we also have a different levels of different types of submissions at the end. There is only one basketball and only one hoop that it goes into, and the options available for you to there, if everyone was of the same height, are, you know, you're really homogenized and really forced into this particular way of playing to get your success and to be successful at that sport. Whereas then if we go look at jiu-jitsu, or if we look at weightlifting, the barbell must go from the ground to overhead within a certain parameter of rules, but there is a variety of different leverages that are quite successful. So we look at people like Naeem Sully, Ham Young Chul, all the way up to Sisman Kolecki, or Kowecki, Lasha Talakatsi. Any number of different athletes are involved in that. Now, again, there is the weight classes, which are separated in a little bit, but if we look at some things, they're very, very similar. So their bar pats will conform to the same principles. We have different centers of mass. They must converge at a certain point, and then the lifter must end up underneath the barbell at the end of that lift. Now, how you get there, while there is certain things that in reality just will have to be adhered to, but what these look like then, when it comes to the athletes, can look very, very different, or looks very different to our naked eye. They conform to the same things, but those different leverages allow them to perform the same thing. But again, if we go back to that basketball thing, we're going to see no real, change, or real any kind of asymmetry in one player to the other.
Yeah, like if you go to an international weightlifting competition, Gerf would look like a giant, lanky, tall person.
So I felt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
I don't know if you
the other thing is, when we're looking at leverages, you have to start thinking about why leverages might be important, right? So the basketball example is super clear, super understandable. The net is up very high. Your job is to put the basketball in the net or else stop somebody else from putting the basketball in the net. Being taller, being longer is better for that. Most of the time when we're looking at lifting or strength sports in general, the leverage thing is slightly different, right? So there are certain levers we'd want to be longer. There are certain levers we'd want to be shorter. Most of the time, if I'm going to bend over to pick something up off the floor, I'd like this long moment arm to be as short as possible, right? So once I hinge over, every inch or centimetre further out in front here is just going to be more force that I'll have to produce later on. So shorter torsos tend to be easier when we're lifting things off the ground. Now, if we look at squatting as the kind of contrast to that, the main thing I'm doing with the squat is keeping that combined center of mass, so the weight of the barbell and my weight will combine into a center of mass somewhere in the center of me here, somewhere in that midriff. And my job is keeping that over my base of support, so over that square that my feet describe. If I have very long legs for squatting, then I'm going to have to push my ass back to get room so I can hinge those legs around. Just means that that femur is going to swing around in that semicircular motion even more, and the longer that lever length is, the worse it's going to be. So most of the time for squatting, we're going to have better outcomes if our torso is longer in relation to our femur. So the distance from our knee to our hip is going to be shorter than the distance from our hip up to our shoulder, or however you want to measure it. Those kind of leverages are very, very individual, right? So you can have somebody who has, in some ways, great leverages for weightlifting, a very, very long torso, short, stumpy little femurs, and then long shin bones again. But if their arms are too short in the snatch and their grip has to be very, very narrow, then you're now once again back to a non-ideal situation. It's for this reason, and for another reason I'll talk about later, that I rarely look at the morphology of athletes when they come to us for coaching, and I've stopped myself from now getting excited when I see somebody who has ideal leverages.
I think the big thing with leverages in different sports is it just gives you the potential to be good. It gives you the potential to have an easier time. You know, if you look at the Ukrainian 102 or 109, who is the snatch world record holder at the moment, you wouldn't look at him and think he's going to be an incredibly technically efficient lifter and lift the weights he's lifting. But lo and behold, he's still lifting them. If you look at someone like Klokov, Lasha, for example, maybe not Lasha, a little bit different for the super heavies, you wouldn't think they have the possibility to be great weightlifters. But really what you should look at, and we kind of talked about this before, but I used to look at people, and when I coach them, you're like, these people have great fucking leverages, they're going to be a great lifter. And more often than not, I was actually wrong in those cases. So leverage really is only one of the few one of the many variables that give you the potential to be good at your sport, but it only increases or decreases your probability when you take into account all the other variables that have to be taken into account, like muscle fiber distribution, environment that they grew up in, environment that they're lifting in or training in, whatever the sport it is they're doing, muscle fiber makeup, their genetics, particular favoritism towards certain movements, motor learning, skill retention, hand-eye coordination, enjoyment from training, hormonal status, ability to excrete drugs faster, metabolites faster, ability to get more out of those drugs, literally things like that, a whole host of random things, ability to assimilate nutrition better for training, so many different things make that difference, and the leverages is only one of the few variables, or one of the many variables, said it again, one of the many things that take into account when you're trying to be the best at a certain sport.
Yeah, I've definitely changed my perception and changed how I initially screen athletes. Because it used to be, for weightlifting and for powerlifting to a certain extent as well, I used to always look at that, and that would kind of colour my perception of how good that athlete is going to be. And I'd let them know if it was a younger athlete just getting into weightlifting and it looked like they were going to be 6'3" or 6'4", I've let plenty of people know that you're probably just too big and tall for weightlifting. Probably isn't going to work for you unless you want to be 140 or 150 kilos, in which case you can be a super heavy and maybe get around it. But I will say, of all the people who've come to me with great proportions, great leverages, more of them have let me down than the poor setups have kind of enlightened me or made me happy in the long run.
So that raises two interesting points actually, and I hope we have enough time. So one of them is funny is that if you're really tall, you gain a load of weight. You're just effectively changing your leverages to be more favourable for weightlifting. And I'd wonder, when you say that the kind of better leverages people let you down more often, is it because they probably have an easier time initially, and then they're less inclined to, when it going gets tough, to keep going with it? It's very funny. I think the most important thing now when I'm screening someone is, will you listen to me? Will you listen and do what I say with the best of your intent? That's all that matters.
For screening for me, I just need to know what's going on in the mind.
Yeah, what do you want?
That's it. Like, you can tell an awful lot about an athlete in that initial kind of interaction, and you'll probably know if it's going to be good or not from there.
Well, it'd be different now if someone came to us and they're like, set up a national system, then it'd be all leverages.
Yeah.
The leverages all over.
Leverages, blood tests, and muscle fibre tests.